Hey everybody, welcome back to the recordings for our textbook. And for this recording, I'm going to be talking about chapter 6, and you'll see that we're going to be focusing on nonverbal communication. Sorry about that. Also, I just want to introduce my second cat, Bubba, who's decided to join me today. So you can see he's in the frame there. I'm hoping that he will get down in a minute, but if I don't let him sit here, then he will cry and whine and pretend that I'm really mean to him. So we will get started. My apologies for the confusion, or I should say distraction. Again, we're talking about nonverbal communication. We're going to define nonverbal communication, and then we'll also talk about types of nonverbal communication. And as you can see from the picture here, these folks are demonstrating, again, a blurry picture, so it's not great. This is not what I would actually recommend using if you were going to design a PowerPoint, but I'm using it again to show why it's maybe not the best visual. What it does offer us, though, is a depiction of different types of nonverbal communication and how, even without words, we're communicating a great deal. As we said in one of the earlier videos, out of the 100% of total communication, nonverbal represents 93%. So that's a lot. This particular chapter that we're talking about, we're not going to spend a whole lot of time on it because you're familiar with most of the terms, I'm sure. Again, the harder work is applying all of these elements effectively in real-world situations. So to start, we'll just define nonverbal communication, and that is when we communicate through non-physical and also behavioral cues. Again, we'll talk about some specific examples, but it's everything other than our words. And because we have verbal and nonverbal communication, if we want to be effective communicators, we want to match our verbal and nonverbal communication, or what you would see here listed as congruent messages. So, for example, if we're talking and let's say you've upset me about something and you say, "Are you okay?" And I go, "Yeah, I'm fine. Totally fine. Yep, couldn't be better." And my words are telling you, or my verbal messages are telling you, yes, everything's great. But my nonverbal communication is telling you things are not great. I'm very irritated. Then I'm actually sending you incongruent messages, meaning they don't match. And if you look at the visual here, I kind of give you an equal sign to represent congruent messages, and then the equal sign with a diagonal line through it, which you should be seeing in math. That's my second sort of reference to math in our class, which means incongruent messages. They don't match. And as you can imagine, we have that phrase, actions speak louder than words. When we send incongruent messages to people, they're more likely to believe the nonverbal than the verbal. So it really serves no purpose to say, "Oh yeah, I'm fine, totally fine," and then roll my eyes, because what the person's going to believe is the nonverbal messages anyway. Again, if we are trying to effectively communicate, let's say at work, we really want to do our best to make sure our messages align verbally and nonverbally. And of course, this helps with, as I said, personal relationships as well. As far as types of nonverbal communication, I'm going to take the time to go through the examples, partly because you should just know them, but partly because you will be asked to apply them in the speech at the end of this course. I have found that if you spend some time preparing the verbal messages, which I'll walk you guys through, that is what you're going to say, and then you are aware of your nonverbal behaviors going into the speech, on the day of the speech, you shouldn't actually be processing or being in the moment about, where should I put my hand? How should I stand? These are things to think about before the day of the speech arrives, because you can't be doing a good job delivering your verbal message if you're worried about your nonverbal message and what other people think of you. So my recommendation would be, start thinking about how you communicate nonverbally now. And by the way, all of these things translate also to being helpful in a job interview and certainly in the workplace. And again, if you're putting attention towards these things now, on the days when they're really important and need to support your verbal message, they will just already do that because you will have been aware and made adjustments as needed. So the first type of nonverbal communication we're going to talk about is kinesics. You can remember that in terms of movement, or the study of kinesiology is your body movement. And that includes things like facial expressions, eye contact, gestures, and even body posture. We also have something our book would call vocalics. I think of them, I learned early on that they were more often referred to as paralinguistic cues, but that's less student friendly, I suppose. Para just means about, linguistic means language. So they're cues about our language. But whether you call them vocalics or paralinguistic cues, you of course would want to know that things like tone, rate, pitch, loudness, or volume, those also communicate nonverbally. And if you've ever been a teenager, usually I think teenage girls get this more than boys, but it does happen with both groups. In talking with parents, there's almost always a time where parents say, hey, watch your tone. When I got that as a teenager, my immediate response was, I don't have a tone, which you can hear by that example. I, in fact, do have a tone. But it was the fact that they brought it up that made me defensive about it. So we can use all of those vocalics or paralinguistic cues to emphasize our message and make sure our verbal messages match or align with our nonverbal messages. Appearance is really helpful to think about, so much so that I put it on the slides twice. And I leave it there because I actually like that I left it twice. Because when I talk to students about preparing for interviews or even speeches, but mostly interviews, sometimes I get pushback from students who say, well, why should I dress in a conservative way if I'm not a conservative person? You know, if they want me to work there, they should accept me with all the tattoos and piercings and sleeveless shirts and short shorts and whatever I want to wear. And while that's maybe true, and I get where you're coming from, if you're trying to work for an organization that their brand is much more conservative and the people who work there dress according to that brand, it isn't so much that they don't appreciate you for who you are, it's that you don't align with their brand. So it's more like if you want to be part of their brand, you would then want to reflect their brand. And I think it's fair for employers to ask that, or, you know, look for folks who at least sort of somewhat match their brand. So if you're ever wondering, what do I wear to an interview? I would think about the nature of the company that you're going to, the time of day. Generally speaking, with whether it's an interview or a speech, you would want to definitely avoid shorts, avoid jeans, avoid sleeveless, avoid sandals, like the summer sandals or open-toed things if you're female. Certainly no flip-flops. If you are a male, having, well, if you're, I was going to say a well-groomed beard, but really grooming is great for everybody. One really big thing that I used to run across with when helping students prepare for interviews, especially those going into a medical field, this is true for everybody, the underneath your nails should be clear and clean, super, super clean. Unless you're going to interview for like a mechanic job or something where your hands should in fact be, you know, in an everyday work situation would not be super clean. I can't think of a time in general. I think your under your nails should still be clean. But I could see if you were again going to be a mechanic or something like that, your hands may not be perfectly moisturized and, you know, free of calluses. But for most of us, if you're in college, it's to go into more of a front office or administrative position, if you will, or, you know, customer facing. So definitely do that. Take care of your nails. We would want to not have a lot of jewelry, not have a lot of perfume, not have a lot of makeup, and then be sure your clothes fit appropriately. All because everything communicates something. So ideally, it communicates what you want it to communicate, not what the other people decide to perceive. Then we have touch, or what we would call haptics. A good memory cue for this is if we were on campus and I walked by and said, hey, what's happening? And I give you a high five, we're touching. So I would say think of happening, like what's happening, and haptics in the same kind of line of language, if you will. They're not at all related. It's just a memory cue. But we can certainly use touch to communicate. And in fact, if you're going to go into education at all, you generally don't want to go around touching kids. But it is very possible if you have a rowdy bunch, in movement. We talked about movement kinesics. If you walk around the room, that's a great classroom management tool. And it's possible to, if need be, and you'd have to make sure the situation is appropriate, but you could lightly touch someone's shoulder just to get them to say, hey, we're changing subjects now, or I need you to calm down, or what have you. Obviously, it needs, again, be highly appropriate. You don't want to just walk around touching people, but certainly you could do this if you have kids, and it can just support or reinforce your messages. Then we have personal space, or what we call proxemics. I always think of a memory cue for this as like approximately how far apart are we, right? So proxemics, personal space. And the visual that you see here comes from our textbook. This has become universally popular topic now because you see here there's a social space, which is 4 to 12 feet, which is what we're asked to do when we are socially distancing ourselves from each other. You can see intimate space is 0 to 18 inches. It's like the space where you would have a partner or maybe a parent or even a baby. Intimate's meant to be really close relationship, not necessarily romantic. Obviously, it's just who you would let in that very close space. Personal space is more like with just general friends and maybe talking to people outside of class. Again, social space now is just kind of all the time. And public space would be beyond 12 feet. All right, so we have talked about the definition of communication. We also talked about the types of nonverbal communication. I hope that that was helpful for you, and I do hope that you will go back and read the textbook. I look forward to seeing your assignments. Thanks, everybody.